She wore a cursed diamond to parties like it was costume jewelry, letting her dog wear it around his neck, tossing it to guests across the dinner table as a joke. Evalyn Walsh McLean owned the Hope Diamond, the most infamous jewel in history, blamed for madness, suicide, and death, and she refused to believe in curses. But then her son was killed by a car at age 9. Her daughter died of an overdose at 25. Her husband descended into insanity and died in a mental institution. Her family fortune evaporated. And through it all, she kept wearing that blue diamond, defiant to the end, convinced that she controlled the curse, rather than the curse controlling her. But here's what nobody tells you about Evalyn Walsh McLean. Before the tragedy, before the curse, before the diamond destroyed everything she loved, she was the richest little girl in America. Born into unimaginable wealth from a gold mine that produced more money in a month than most people would see in a lifetime. What you'll discover at the end about what happened to the Hope Diamond after her death will fundamentally change how you think about curses, tragedy, and whether objects can truly carry evil, or whether some people are simply destined for catastrophe, regardless of what they wear around their necks. Evalyn Walsh was born on August 1, 1886 in Leadville, Colorado, in a rough mining camp where fortunes were made and lost daily, where men died in cave-ins and shootouts, where the only law was the law enforced by whoever had the most guns and money. Her father, Thomas Walsh, was an Irish immigrant who'd come to America with nothing, worked as a carpenter, saved every penny, and eventually made his way west, following rumors of gold and silver deposits that could make a man rich overnight. Leadville in the 1880s was about as far from refined society as you could get. It was a place of mud streets and wooden buildings, of saloons and brothels, of miners who spent their days underground risking death for wages, and their nights drinking away whatever they'd earned. Violence was common, disease was rampant, infant mortality was staggering. This was the world into which Evalyn was born, and her survival to adulthood was itself somewhat remarkable, given the harsh conditions. The town sat at an elevation of over 10,000 feet in the Colorado Rockies, where winter temperatures could drop to 40 degrees below zero, where snow fell from September through May, where the thin air made every physical task more difficult. The mines themselves were death traps, poorly ventilated shafts where men worked by candlelight, breathing air thick with rock dust, constantly at risk of cave-ins, explosions, and accidents that could maim or kill in an instant. Leadville's cemetery filled rapidly with miners who died young, leaving widows and orphans to fend for themselves in an unforgiving environment. Leadville had been founded during the Colorado silver boom of the late 1870s, when silver deposits were discovered in the area. The town grew from nothing to a population of over 40,000 in just a few years, making it one of the largest cities in Colorado and certainly one of the roughest. Gunfights in the streets were so common that the local newspaper stopped reporting them unless someone particularly important was killed. The town had over 100 saloons, numerous gambling houses, and a thriving red light district that operated openly despite periodic reform movements. But Thomas Walsh was different from most prospectors. He wasn't a gambler chasing wild dreams of striking it rich. He was methodical, educated in geology and mining engineering, willing to work claims that others had abandoned, believing that with the right knowledge and enough persistence, he could find wealth where others saw only worked-out mines and exhausted veins. And in 1896, when Evalyn was 10 years old, Thomas Walsh proved himself spectacularly correct. He purchased an abandoned mine called the Camp Bird, located high in the Colorado mountains near Ouray. Other miners had worked it and given up, convinced it was played out. But Walsh had studied the geology and believed that previous miners had been following the wrong veins, that the real deposit was deeper and in a different location than where everyone had been digging. He invested everything he had into developing the mine, bringing in new equipment, hiring skilled miners, following his geological theories into areas others had ignored. The name Camp Bird came from the birds that nested in the canyon where the mine was located, a detail that seemed almost whimsical given the industrial violence of mining operations. The mine was located in a spectacular alpine setting, surrounded by 13,000-foot peaks, accessible only by treacherous mountain roads that were impassable for months each winter. Working the mine required extraordinary logistics, transporting equipment up narrow mountain trails, housing workers in camps that were buried in snow for half the year, maintaining operations in conditions that would have defeated less determined men. Walsh's approach to developing the camp bird was revolutionary for its time. He installed modern equipment, including pneumatic drills, electric lighting in the tunnels, and a comprehensive ventilation system that made the mine significantly safer than most operations. He paid his workers above-market wages and provided better housing than was standard in mining camps, believing that satisfied workers were more productive and less likely to steal high-grade ore. He built a mill directly at the mine site to process ore immediately, rather than transporting raw ore down the mountain, saving enormous amounts in transportation costs. And then they hit it. Not just gold, but gold ore so rich that it was almost unbelievable. The Camp Bird mine proved to contain one of the richest gold deposits in American history. Within months, Thomas Walsh went from a struggling prospector to one of the wealthiest men in America. The mine produced gold worth millions of dollars annually, and this is in 1890s dollars, when $1 million was an almost incomprehensible fortune. By the time Evalyn was a teenager, her father was earning more money every month than most industrial titans earned in a year. The richness of the ore was extraordinary even by Colorado mining standards. In some areas of the mine, the gold was so concentrated that miners could see it gleaming in the rock by lamplight. The ore assayed at values that made experienced mining engineers question the results, thinking there must be errors in the testing. But the numbers were accurate. Thomas Walsh had found one of those rare deposits that mining men dreamed about but almost never actually discovered. Some ore samples ran as high as several hundred ounces of gold per ton, wealth almost beyond calculation. The geology of the Camp Bird deposit was fascinating. The gold occurred in what's called a vein deposit, where mineral-rich fluids had filled cracks in the host rock millions of years ago. Walsh's genius was recognizing that the main vein extended deeper and at a different angle than previous miners had assumed. By following the geology rather than following established mining patterns, he found the mother lode that others had literally walked past. The Walsh family's transformation was instantaneous and total. They moved from a rough mining camp to Denver, then to Washington, D.C., purchasing a mansion, hiring servants, ordering custom-made clothing from Paris, joining the social circles of America's elite. Thomas Walsh, the Irish immigrant carpenter, was now received by presidents. His wife, Carrie, who'd lived in mining camps and boarding houses, was now hosting elaborate parties attended by senators and ambassadors. And Evalyn, who'd grown up playing in the dirt streets of Leadville, was now an heiress whose eventual inheritance would be one of the largest fortunes in America. The mansion they purchased in Washington was on Massachusetts Avenue, in the neighborhood that was becoming home to America's wealthiest families and foreign embassies. It was a French Renaissance-style palace with 60 rooms, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and every luxury that money could buy. The transformation from mining camp cabin to Massachusetts Avenue mansion took less than 2 years. A leap across social classes so dramatic that it would have been unimaginable in most societies, but was characteristic of America's Gilded Age. The Walsh Mansion became one of Washington's social centers. Thomas Walsh, despite his rough background, proved to be a natural diplomat and host. He understood that wealth alone wasn't enough to gain acceptance in Washington society. You also needed to be useful to the people in power. He made substantial donations to political campaigns, hosted fundraisers for senators and congressmen, and generally made himself indispensable to Washington's political establishment. President Theodore Roosevelt was a frequent guest at Walsh parties, as were numerous cabinet members and Supreme Court justices. But sudden wealth, especially wealth on this scale, does strange things to people. Evalyn grew up with absolutely no sense of normal financial limits. She had never known poverty. Her earliest memories were already of wealth, since her father struck gold when she was 10. She had no framework for understanding what money meant to normal people, no comprehension of budgets or savings or economic constraints. Money was simply infinite, something that appeared whenever you wanted it, in whatever quantities you desired. Her parents indulged her completely. Anything Evalyn wanted, Evalyn got. As a child, she had a pony that she rode through the streets of Washington, accompanied by a groom in formal livery. She had a private tutor who taught her music, art, languages, though by all accounts she was an indifferent student who preferred playing to studying. She had closets full of dresses from Paris, drawers full of jewelry, toys imported from Europe. Her birthday parties were legendary events attended by the children of Washington's elite, with entertainment, elaborate decorations, and gifts that would have been appropriate for royalty. The contrast between Evalyn's childhood and her father's couldn't have been more extreme. Thomas had known genuine poverty, had worked with his hands for wages, had experienced the uncertainty of not knowing where his next meal would come from. Evalyn knew only abundance, only certainty that whatever she wanted would be provided, only the absolute security that came from having parents with seemingly unlimited resources. This fundamental difference in their formative experiences would shape how each understood money and its proper use. Thomas tried in his way to teach Evalyn about the value of money and the importance of hard work. He would take her to the Camp Bird mine during summer visits to Colorado, showing her the dangerous, difficult work that miners did to extract the gold that funded her lifestyle. He would explain the geology, the economics, the risks involved in mining. But these lessons never really took hold. To Evalyn, the mine was just an interesting place to visit, the source of money that appeared like magic, not a business that required constant attention and involved real danger to real workers. As she grew into her teenage years, Evalyn became wilder and more reckless. She was beautiful in an unconventional way, not the delicate, refined beauty that was fashionable in the Gilded Age, but a more vivid, energetic attractiveness that came from her obvious vitality and her complete lack of self-consciousness about her wealth and status. She drove automobiles too fast. She was one of the first women in Washington to own and drive a car. She stayed out too late at parties. She drank and smoked in public, shocking society matrons who believed young women should be demure and modest. Her automobile adventures became legendary in Washington society. She drove a bright red Pope Hartford touring car that she'd ordered custom painted in her favorite color. She raced it through the streets of Georgetown and along Massachusetts Avenue, sometimes reaching speeds of 30 or even 40 miles per hour, genuinely dangerous velocities on the poorly maintained roads of early 1900s Washington. She was stopped by police on multiple occasions, but her father's connections and wealth ensured she never faced serious consequences. One particularly notorious incident involved Evalyn racing her automobile against the son of a senator through the streets of Washington at night. They started at DuPont Circle and raced to the Capitol building, weaving through traffic, running red lights, terrifying pedestrians. Evalyn won the race, but crashed her car into a lamppost near the Capitol. Both vehicles were damaged, both drivers were bruised, and the incident made the newspapers. Thomas Walsh had to make substantial donations to the Police Benevolent Fund to keep the charges from being filed. Evalyn thought the whole thing was hilarious. Her parents couldn't control her, and frankly, they didn't try very hard. Thomas Walsh had built his fortune through taking risks and defying conventional wisdom. He had a hard time telling his daughter not to do the same. Carrie Walsh wanted social acceptance for her family, but she also believed that extreme wealth gave you the freedom to ignore social conventions if you chose to. They gave Evalyn essentially unlimited money and minimal supervision, a combination guaranteed to produce interesting results. And then, in 1905, when Evalyn was 19, she met Edward Beale McLean. Ned, as everyone called him, was the son of John Roll McLean, who owned the Washington Post and the Cincinnati Enquirer. Like Evalyn, Ned had been born into sudden wealth and raised with no financial discipline whatsoever. Like Evalyn, he was reckless, wild, and convinced that money could solve any problem and buy any pleasure. They were perfectly matched in the worst possible way, two people with unlimited resources and limited judgment, each encouraging the other's worst impulses. Ned was tall, handsome, charming when he wanted to be, and already showing signs of the alcoholism that would eventually destroy him. He drank openly and heavily, treating alcohol consumption as a competitive sport rather than a social pleasure. He'd been expelled from multiple schools for behavior issues. He'd crashed several automobiles. He'd been involved in scandals that his father's money and influence had quietly suppressed. He was, in every way, exactly the wrong person for Evalyn to become involved with, which of course made him irresistible to her. The McLean family fortune was newer than the Walsh fortune, but equally substantial. John Roll McLean had purchased the Washington Post in 1905 and had built it into an influential newspaper, though his methods were often questionable. He used the Post to promote his political allies and destroy his enemies, treating journalism as a weapon rather than a public service. The Cincinnati Enquirer, which he'd inherited from his father, was run along similar lines. The newspapers generated enormous revenue, and like Thomas Walsh, John McLean had no idea how to teach his son financial responsibility. Their courtship was a spectacle that scandalized Washington society. They raced automobiles through the streets. They held parties at expensive restaurants and hotels that went on until dawn. They traveled to New York and Europe together without chaperones, violating every rule of proper behavior for unmarried young people. They spent money with such abandon that even other wealthy people found it excessive. Ned gave Evalyn a ring with a diamond so large that people assumed it was fake. No one would actually wear a real diamond that size casually. The engagement ring incident is revealing of their entire relationship. Ned purchased it from Tiffany's for an amount that would have supported a working-class family for decades. When he presented it to Evalyn, she laughed and said it looked like something from a theater costume department. Rather than being offended, Ned was delighted by her irreverence toward expensive jewelry, seeing it as confirmation that she was as unconventional and reckless as he was. Their engagement parties were legendary for their extravagance and chaos. At one party at Delmonico's in New York, they ordered champagne for everyone in the restaurant, over 200 people, and ended up with a bill for over $5,000 just for drinks. At another party, they hired an entire circus including elephants, acrobats, and clowns to perform at the McLean estate. Ned got drunk and tried to ride one of the elephants, falling off and breaking his arm. Evalyn thought it was hilarious and had the incident photographed. Thomas Walsh disapproved of the relationship. He thought Ned was a wastrel and a drunk, which was accurate. He thought the McLean family, despite their wealth, lacked the fundamental character and values that Thomas prized. He tried to break up the relationship by taking Evalyn on an extended tour of Europe, hoping that distance and time would cool her infatuation. The European tour lasted nearly a year and covered most of the continent. Thomas spared no expense, booking suites in the finest hotels, hiring private guides, arranging meetings with European aristocracy and cultural figures. He showed Evalyn art, architecture, history, music, everything he'd never had access to during his own difficult youth, everything he hoped would broaden her perspective and help her see that there were better choices available to her than Ned McLean. They visited the great museums of Europe, the Louvre in Paris, the Uffizi in Florence, the Prado in Madrid. Thomas hired art historians to give Evalyn private tours and explain the significance of the masterworks they were viewing. They attended opera in Vienna, ballet in St. Petersburg, theater in London. They met with princes and dukes and counts, people whose titles stretched back centuries, people who understood that wealth was meant to be preserved and passed down through generations, rather than spent frivolously. It didn't work. Evalyn and Ned exchanged letters and telegrams. They planned to reunite as soon as Evalyn returned to America. And when Thomas realized he couldn't prevent the marriage, he reluctantly gave his consent, perhaps hoping that marriage and its responsibilities would settle both young people down. If you're already fascinated by how unlimited wealth and minimal supervision created one of the Gilded Age's most notorious personalities, make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next shows exactly how Evalyn's marriage to Ned McLean set the stage for decades of excess, tragedy, and ultimately the acquisition of the most cursed jewel in history. Evalyn Walsh and Ned McLean were married in 1908 in a ceremony that epitomized Gilded Age excess. The wedding took place at the Walsh Mansion in Washington, with thousands of dollars spent on decorations, the finest champagne and food, and entertainment by the best musicians in the country. Evalyn wore a dress that cost more than most people earned in years, covered in lace and embroidery and pearls. The wedding gifts filled several rooms, including solid gold place settings, diamond jewelry, and checks from wealthy relatives that totaled hundreds of thousands of dollars. The guest list read like a who's who of American power and wealth. Senators and congressmen attended, along with cabinet members, foreign diplomats, industrial magnates, and society figures from New York, Philadelphia, and Newport. The ceremony itself was conducted by a prominent Episcopal bishop. The reception featured an orchestra of 50 musicians, tens of thousands of flowers imported from hothouses across the country, and a wedding cake that stood 6 feet tall and weighed over 200 pounds. The wedding dress itself became the subject of newspaper articles. Designed by a Parisian couturier, it featured over 1,000 hand-sewn pearls, imported lace that had taken lacemakers in Belgium 6 months to create, and a train that extended 20 feet behind Evalyn. The dress cost over $10,000, more than a skilled worker would earn in 15 years. Evalyn wore it once for perhaps 4 hours, then had it carefully preserved in a special case where it would never be worn again. After the wedding, the couple embarked on a honeymoon that would last nearly a year and take them around the world. They traveled in private railroad cars and on luxury steamships. They stayed in the finest hotels in Paris, London, Rome, Cairo, and dozens of other cities. They purchased anything that caught their fancy: artwork, jewelry, furniture, cars. They attended parties with European royalty and American expatriates. They lived like characters from a novel, experiencing the world as a series of expensive entertainments designed solely for their pleasure. In Paris, they rented a suite at the Ritz for weeks at a time, ordering custom clothing from the finest couturiers, attending the opera and ballet, dining at Maxim's and other fashionable restaurants. In London, they were presented at court and attended society events where Evalyn's American directness and lack of reverence for aristocratic protocol both charmed and scandalized the British upper classes. In Rome, they had a private audience with the Pope and purchased ancient artifacts that any museum would have been proud to own. In Egypt, they hired a team of archaeologists to give them a private tour of recently excavated tombs in the Valley of the Kings. They rode camels to the pyramids, stayed in luxury tents in the desert, and purchased antiquities that would later be discovered to be of questionable authenticity. Ned bought Evalyn a necklace supposedly worn by Cleopatra, paying thousands of dollars for what was almost certainly a modern fake. Neither of them cared about authenticity. They cared about having interesting stories to tell at parties. And it was during this honeymoon, in 1909, that Evalyn first encountered the Hope Diamond. They were in Paris, visiting the shop of Pierre Cartier, the famous jeweler who catered to the wealthiest clients in the world. Cartier knew that he had unusual customers in the McLeans: young, American, fabulously wealthy, and apparently interested in buying expensive jewelry without much concern for price. He showed them various pieces, gauging their reactions, trying to understand what would appeal to them. And then he brought out the Hope Diamond. Even among extraordinary jewels, the Hope Diamond was unique, a deep blue diamond of over 45 carats, with a color so intense and unusual that it seemed to glow with its own internal light. The diamond had a history that Cartier related to the McLeans as he showed them the stone. It had allegedly been stolen from a Hindu idol in India centuries ago. The thief who stole it was supposedly torn apart by wild dogs. It had belonged to the French royal family, and both Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette had been beheaded during the French Revolution. It had been owned by a series of people who experienced terrible fates: madness, suicide, murder, financial ruin. Cartier's recitation was theatrical and carefully rehearsed. He dimmed the lights in his private showing room to make the diamond's color appear even more dramatic. He spoke in hushed, ominous tones about the curse, watching the McLeans' reactions carefully. He presented documents, some authentic, some fabricated, that seemed to support the curse narrative. He was, in essence, selling not just a diamond but a story. And he understood that for customers like the McLeans, the story was as valuable as the stone itself. Cartier understood psychology. He knew that telling wealthy young Americans they shouldn't buy something because it was cursed was the best possible sales technique. They wanted to be daring, to defy superstition, to own something that others feared. The curse made the diamond irresistible rather than frightening. And he was right. Both Evalyn and Ned were fascinated, treating the curse as an entertaining story rather than a serious warning. Cartier's recitation of the diamond's history was part of his sales pitch. He understood that for customers like the McLeans, a jewel's notoriety and dramatic history made it more desirable, not less. They weren't looking for safe, conventional pieces. They wanted jewelry with stories, items that would shock and impress when displayed at parties. And what could be more impressive than owning the most cursed diamond in the world? But during this initial encounter, Evalyn didn't purchase the Hope diamond. She was intrigued, certainly, and she tried it on, marveling at the deep blue color and the way the diamond seemed to capture and transform light. But even for the McLeans, spending the amount Cartier was asking for the Hope diamond, over $150,000, more than $3 million in modern currency, required some thought. They left Paris without the diamond, continuing their honeymoon travels. The newlyweds returned to Washington and settled into married life, which for them meant a continuation of the wild spending and reckless behavior that had characterized their courtship. They purchased an enormous estate called Friendship just outside Washington, with 50 rooms, extensive grounds, and facilities for entertaining on a grand scale. They hired a full staff of servants. They purchased multiple automobiles, horses, and all the accoutrements of extreme wealth. They hosted parties that became legendary in Washington society for their extravagance and duration. Friendship was located in what is now McLean, Virginia. The town was actually named after the family. The estate encompassed over 75 acres of landscaped grounds, with gardens, fountains, a swimming pool, tennis courts, and stables. The mansion itself was a sprawling structure with ballrooms, multiple dining rooms, libraries, sitting rooms, and enough bedrooms to accommodate dozens of overnight guests. The servants' quarters were separate buildings that housed the large staff required to maintain such an establishment. The property had been purchased for $250,000, an enormous sum in 1910. And Evalyn immediately spent another $100,000 on renovations and improvements. She had the entire interior redecorated by designers from New York, ordering custom furniture, imported fabrics, and artwork from European galleries. She had the grounds completely landscaped, installing formal French gardens, rose gardens, vegetable gardens, and even a small private zoo where she kept exotic animals, including peacocks, flamingos, and at one point, a young lion. Ned took over management of the Washington Post from his father, but he showed little aptitude or interest in actually running a newspaper. He treated it as a toy, interfering with editorial decisions based on personal whims, using the paper to attack his enemies and praise his friends, and generally demonstrating that inheriting wealth doesn't automatically confer competence or wisdom. The paper suffered under his leadership, losing prestige and circulation, though the financial resources of the McLean family kept it afloat despite Ned's mismanagement. The Washington Post, under Ned's control, became increasingly erratic and partisan. He fired experienced journalists who questioned his judgment and hired cronies who would do whatever he wanted. He used the paper's editorial pages to settle personal scores, sometimes attacking people who'd slighted him socially rather than for any legitimate news reason. He missed important stories because he was too drunk or disinterested to pay attention to what his staff was trying to tell him. The paper's reputation, which had been solid under his father's ownership, began to decline noticeably. One particularly egregious incident involved Ned ordering the Post to attack a senator who'd voted against a bill that would have benefited one of Ned's business interests. The attack was based on fabricated information and resulted in a libel lawsuit that cost the Post $20,000 to settle. Ned thought it was worth it because he'd punished someone who'd crossed him, demonstrating his complete failure to understand the difference between personal vendetta and legitimate journalism. In 1910, Evalyn gave birth to her first child, a son named Evalyn Walsh McLean. The baby was healthy and seemed perfect, and for a brief moment, Evalyn appeared to settle into something resembling normal life. She doted on her son, decorating an elaborate nursery, hiring the best nurses and nannies, purchasing every toy and comfort that infant could possibly need. She seemed, temporarily at least, to have found something that engaged her attention beyond parties and jewelry and reckless adventures. But motherhood didn't fundamentally change Evalyn's character or lifestyle. She continued to spend extravagantly, party late into the night, and generally live as though there were no consequences to her actions. And in 1911, Pierre Cartier contacted her again about the Hope Diamond. He had reset the stone, placing it in a new setting with smaller white diamonds arranged around it to enhance the blue diamond's extraordinary color. He brought it to Washington personally to show it to Evalyn, and this time she couldn't resist. The new setting was designed specifically to appeal to Evalyn's taste for dramatic jewelry. The Hope Diamond was mounted as the centerpiece of an elaborate pendant surrounded by 16 white diamonds, alternating between large pear-shaped diamonds and smaller round brilliants. The whole piece hung from a chain of white diamonds that itself contained 45 individual stones. The setting was modern, elegant, and designed to maximize the Hope Diamond's visual impact while making it wearable for social occasions. Evalyn purchased the Hope Diamond in 1911 for $154,000, roughly equivalent to over $3 million today. Her father tried to talk her out of it, arguing that the curse stories were more than just superstition, that the diamond really did seem to bring misfortune to its owners. But Evalyn dismissed the warnings. She didn't believe in curses. She believed in her own invincibility, in the power of wealth to overcome any obstacle, in her personal immunity to the sorts of tragedies that afflicted ordinary people. Thomas Walsh's objections were prescient. He'd seen enough of life to understand that defying fate and courting danger rarely ended well. He'd witnessed men in the mining camps who took foolish risks and paid for them with their lives. He tried to explain to Evalyn that some things, whether you called them curses or just patterns of bad luck, were real, and that deliberately inviting trouble was asking for consequences. But Evalyn wouldn't listen. She was 25 years old, wealthy beyond imagination, married to a man as reckless as herself, and convinced that she was somehow special, somehow exempt from the ordinary rules that governed other people's lives. She wore the Hope Diamond constantly, not locked in a vault, not saved for special occasions, but worn to parties, to dinners, to the theater, even casually around the house. She wore it so frequently that people got used to seeing her with this extraordinary jewel, treating it almost as part of her persona, rather than as the incredibly valuable and historically significant object it was. She even, famously, let her dog wear it on occasion, fastening the diamond to the dog's collar and laughing at the absurdity of a pet wearing jewelry worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The dog was a Great Dane named Mike, and Evalyn would attach the Hope Diamond to his collar at parties, then let him wander among the guests. The sight of this enormous dog wearing a diamond worth more than most houses invariably caused gasps and nervous laughter. Some guests were horrified by what they saw as sacrilege. Others were amused by Evalyn's audacity. She enjoyed the attention and the shock value, using the diamond as a prop in her ongoing performance of wealth without reverence, luxury without awe. Evalyn also reportedly tossed the Hope Diamond across dinner tables to guests, treating it like a toy rather than a priceless jewel. At one dinner party, she threw it to a duchess from across the table, and the duchess fumbled the catch, the diamond falling to the floor and rolling under the table. Servants scrambled to find it, while Evalyn laughed at the chaos. The incident became the talk of Washington society for weeks. The diamond became part of her public image. Newspaper society columns mentioned it constantly. When people described Evalyn Walsh McLean, they inevitably mentioned the Hope Diamond. It became the visual symbol of her wealth, her defiance of convention, and her absolute conviction that she was special, protected, immune to the ordinary rules that governed other people's lives. What you discover about the tragedies that followed will disturb you, because whether you believe in curses or not, the sequence of catastrophes that destroyed the McLean family after Evalyn acquired the Hope Diamond is almost too terrible to be coincidental. The first hint that Evalyn's charmed life might not continue indefinitely came in 1916, when her father Thomas Walsh died. He'd been the source of the family fortune, the self-made man who'd risen from poverty to unimaginable wealth through intelligence, persistence, and luck. His death was from natural causes. He was in his 60s and had worked hard his entire life, but it marked the end of an era for the Walsh family. The man who'd built the fortune was gone, and the responsibility for managing and preserving that wealth now fell to people who'd never worked for it and didn't truly understand it. Thomas Walsh's death came after a brief illness. He'd been in declining health for several months, suffering from what doctors diagnosed as stomach troubles, but what may have been cancer or some other serious condition that medical science of the era couldn't effectively treat. He died at home, surrounded by family, having made careful provisions in his will for the distribution of his estate. He left the Camp Bird mine to business partners who'd helped him develop it, his mansion to Carrie, and substantial cash inheritances to Evalyn and her brother Vincent. Evalyn inherited approximately $10 million from her father, plus an additional trust fund worth several million more. This was in addition to the wealth she already had access to through her marriage to Ned. She was, by any measure, one of the richest women in America, with financial resources that would allow her to live in extraordinary luxury for the rest of her life without ever reducing her capital. But Evalyn had never learned financial discipline or restraint. She continued spending as she always had, and indeed increased her spending, ordering more jewelry, purchasing more properties, hosting more elaborate parties. The money seemed infinite, and she treated it as such, never considering that fortunes built up over decades could be dissipated in years if spending exceeded income by enough of a margin. Ned's situation was similar. His father, John Roll McLean, died in 1916 as well, leaving Ned in control of the Washington Post and the Cincinnati Enquirer, plus substantial real estate holdings and other investments. Ned was now one of the wealthiest men in Washington, with income from his inherited newspapers and properties that should have sustained any reasonable lifestyle indefinitely. But Ned wasn't reasonable. He spent money on parties, on alcohol. He was drinking heavily by this point, a problem that would only worsen with time. On cars, on gambling, on maintaining multiple properties in Washington, Newport, and elsewhere. He made poor business decisions, investing in schemes that collapsed, trusting advisors who stole from him, and generally demonstrating that being rich and being competent with money are entirely different things. The couple's lifestyle during this period was extraordinary, even by Gilded Age standards. Friendship, their estate outside Washington, became famous for parties that lasted for days, with guests staying in the mansion's many bedrooms, with food and drink flowing constantly, with entertainment ranging from live music to private film screenings to elaborate games and contests. Evalyn and Ned would sometimes decide on a whim to host a party, sending telegrams to friends that afternoon inviting them to arrive that evening, then mobilizing their staff to prepare food, set up accommodations, and create an instant celebration. One particularly legendary party at Friendship lasted for an entire week. Guests arrived on Friday evening and some didn't leave until the following Friday. Food and alcohol were available 24 hours a day. Musicians were hired to play at various times throughout each day and night. Activities included swimming, tennis, horseback riding, automobile races on the estate's private roads, scavenger hunts with expensive prizes, and elaborate costume entertainments. The cost of this single week-long party exceeded $10,000, enough to buy a substantial house in most American cities. The staff at Friendship numbered over 100 people: servants, groundskeepers, chauffeurs, cooks, maids, footmen, and various specialists hired to maintain the property and serve the McLean family's needs. The annual cost of maintaining the household was enormous, equivalent to millions in modern currency, and this was just one of several properties the McLeans owned. But Evalyn and Ned never questioned these expenses, never asked whether they were spending too much, never considered that their rate of consumption might eventually outpace even their substantial resources. In 1915, Evalyn gave birth to her second child, a son named Jock. 2 years later came her third child, a daughter named Evalyn Walsh McLean Jr., though everyone called her Evie. And in 1920 came her fourth child, another son named Edward Beale McLean Jr. The McLean family now included 4 children, all of whom were being raised in the same atmosphere of unlimited wealth and minimal discipline that had shaped their parents. Little Vincent, the oldest, was particularly spoiled. He was given anything he wanted: toys, pets, ponies, special treats. He was doted on by servants who wouldn't discipline him for fear of offending his parents. He was allowed to do more or less as he pleased, with the assumption that his parents' wealth and status would protect him from any consequences. He was, in essence, being raised exactly as Evalyn had been raised, with all the same lack of boundaries and preparation for real life. Vincent had his own pony, his own governess, his own playroom filled with toys that most children could only dream about. He had a miniature automobile that actually ran, custom built for him by a company that normally made full-size cars. He had a complete set of toy soldiers, over 1,000 individual figures representing various armies throughout history. He had everything except the boundaries, discipline, and sense of consequences that children need to develop into functional adults. And then came the first great tragedy directly connected to the Hope Diamond. On May 18, 1919, 9-year-old Vincent was playing near the family's estate in Washington. He ran into the street chasing a ball or a friend. Accounts vary on exactly what happened, and was struck by a car. He was rushed to the hospital, but his injuries were catastrophic. He died later that day, Evalyn and Ned keeping vigil beside his bed, unable to do anything, despite all their wealth and connections and resources. The details of Vincent's death were devastating in their ordinariness. He'd been playing outside friendship with friends. Someone had kicked a ball into the street. Vincent, acting on childish impulse without thinking about danger, had run after it. The driver of the car, who was himself devastated by what had happened, hadn't seen the boy until it was too late. Vincent was struck at speed and thrown several feet. By the time servants reached him, he was unconscious and bleeding. He never regained consciousness at the hospital. The death of Vincent shattered Evalyn in ways that even she, with all her psychological resilience and defiance, couldn't completely overcome. She had believed that wealth could protect her family, that her money and status created a barrier against the ordinary tragedies that befell other people. The death of her son proved that belief false in the most painful way possible. No amount of money could bring him back. No social connection could reverse what had happened. She was helpless, just like any parent who loses a child, and the helplessness was almost as unbearable as the grief. Make sure you're subscribed because the sequence of tragedies that follows shows how the Hope Diamond curse, whether real or imagined, seemed to pursue Evalyn Walsh McLean relentlessly, destroying everything she loved while she remained powerless to stop it. After Vincent's death, Evalyn's behavior changed. She became more reckless, drinking more heavily, using morphine and other drugs that were legally available to wealthy people through compliant physicians. She still threw parties, still wore the Hope Diamond, still maintained her public persona as a glamorous heiress, but those who knew her well could see the damage. She was trying to outrun grief through constant distraction, filling every moment with activity and sensation so that she wouldn't have to sit quietly with her loss. Morphine was legally prescribed in the 1920s for various conditions, including severe emotional distress. Evalyn's doctors, and she had several, each willing to write prescriptions for whatever she requested, provided her with ample supplies. She became dependent on the drug, using it to numb both physical and emotional pain, increasing her doses over time as tolerance developed. Friends who saw her during this period reported that she often seemed detached, distant, speaking in a dreamy voice that suggested she was experiencing the world through a pharmaceutical haze. Ned's response was similar but more destructive. He had always drunk heavily, but after Vincent's death he became an alcoholic in the clinical sense. someone whose entire life revolved around accessing and consuming alcohol. He began neglecting the Washington Post even more thoroughly than before, making erratic decisions, firing competent employees and hiring incompetent cronies, using the paper to settle personal scores. He was drunk in public with increasing frequency, embarrassing himself and his family at social events. There are documented accounts of Ned showing up drunk to important political dinners, insulting senators and diplomats, making scenes that horrified other guests. At one White House reception, he had to be quietly escorted out by Secret Service agents after he began arguing loudly with a foreign ambassador. At another event, he passed out at the dinner table and had to be carried home by his servants. His drinking wasn't a secret vice conducted in private. It was a public spectacle that damaged the McLean family's social standing. The marriage, which had never been based on much more than mutual attraction and shared love of excess, began to deteriorate. Evalyn and Ned fought constantly, often in front of servants and friends, screaming accusations and recriminations at each other. Ned accused Evalyn of caring more about jewelry and parties than about their family. Evalyn accused Ned of being a drunk and a failure. Both accusations were accurate, and both caused wounds that never healed. The fights were legendary among Washington servants, who gossiped about the McLean household's dysfunction. There are accounts of Evalyn throwing jewelry at Ned during arguments, of Ned smashing furniture in drunken rages, of both of them screaming insults loud enough to be heard by neighbors despite the size of the estate. Their children witnessed these fights, growing up in an atmosphere of wealth and chaos, luxury, and emotional violence. In 1921, Ned left Evalyn and moved to a suite at the Wardman Park Hotel in Washington, effectively separating from her, though not pursuing a legal divorce. He continued to drink, surrounded himself with questionable companions, and spiraled deeper into alcoholism and depression. Evalyn raised their remaining 3 children essentially as a single mother, though with abundant financial resources and full-time servants to help with the practical aspects of child rearing. During the 1920s, Evalyn's life became a strange mixture of tragedy and glamour. She continued to host elaborate parties at Friendship, maintaining her position as one of Washington's leading hostesses. She wore the Hope Diamond constantly, almost defiantly, as though daring the curse to do its worst. She involved herself in various social causes and political intrigues, using her wealth and connections to influence events in Washington. She became a confidant of presidents and first ladies, a behind-the-scenes power broker whose opinions and support mattered in political circles. Evalyn became particularly close to Florence Harding, wife of President Warren G. Harding. The two women had similar backgrounds. Both had married men who turned out to be disappointments. Both had experienced tragedy. Both understood the loneliness that could exist even in the midst of wealth and power. Evalyn hosted parties that the Hardings attended, advised Florence on social matters, and became one of the few people Florence trusted enough to confide in about her husband's infidelities and her own fears about his presidency. When President Harding died suddenly in 1923, under circumstances that sparked conspiracy theories, Evalyn was one of the first people Florence called. She rushed to Florence's side, helped arrange the funeral, and provided emotional support through the difficult transition. The friendship between the two women deepened during this period, both of them understanding what it meant to lose people they'd relied on and to face an uncertain future despite their wealth and position. But behind the glamorous facade, tragedy continued to accumulate. Her mother, Carrie Walsh, died in 1932, severing another connection to the earlier, happier period of Evalyn's life. Ned's alcoholism worsened to the point where he could no longer function even minimally in society. By the early 1930s, he was clearly mentally ill, experiencing delusions and paranoia that went beyond simple drunkenness. In 1933, Evalyn had him committed to a mental institution where he would spend the rest of his life. He died in 1941, his mind and body destroyed by decades of alcoholism. A cautionary tale about what happens when unlimited wealth meets addictive personality. The mental institution was Shepherd Pratt Hospital in Maryland, one of the most expensive private psychiatric facilities in the country. Even in his final degradation, Ned received care that cost thousands of dollars per year. He spent his days in a private suite, attended by nurses and psychiatrists, but beyond the reach of meaningful recovery. The alcohol had caused permanent brain damage. The years of excess had destroyed not just his liver and other organs, but his fundamental personality. The charming, reckless young man Evalyn had married no longer existed. What remained was a shell, confused and angry, trapped in delusions that no amount of medical care could dispel. In 1933, the Washington Post, the newspaper that had been the foundation of the McLean family fortune, had to be sold. Ned's mismanagement and the family's extravagant spending had left them in financial difficulty despite their enormous initial resources. The paper was sold at auction to Eugene Meyer for $825,000, a fraction of what it had been worth before Ned took control. The sale marked the McLeans' fall from the pinnacle of Washington media and political influence. Eugene Meyer, who purchased the Post, would transform it from the declining property Ned had mismanaged into one of America's great newspapers. His daughter Katharine Graham would later become its publisher and lead it through the Pentagon Papers and Watergate investigations. The Washington Post would eventually be worth billions. But all of that potential was squandered during the years when Ned McLean owned it, another casualty of the curse of wealth without wisdom. But the worst was yet to come. Evalyn's daughter Evie, the little girl born in 1917, grew into a beautiful but troubled young woman. She was artistic, creative, and sensitive, perhaps too sensitive for the harsh environment of Washington society and the dysfunction of the McLean family. She struggled with her parents' separation, with her father's mental illness, with the pressure of being Evalyn Walsh McLean's daughter, and the weight of expectations that came with that name. Evie showed real artistic talent, painting and drawing with skill that suggested genuine ability rather than dilettante dabbling. But she couldn't focus on her art long enough to develop it seriously. She was too distracted by the chaos of her family, too damaged by what she'd witnessed and experienced, too prone to using alcohol and drugs to numb the pain of simply being who she was. In the late 1930s, Evie married a man her mother disapproved of, a marriage that ended quickly in divorce. She began drinking heavily, following the path her father had taken. She used drugs, prescription medications mixed with alcohol in dangerous combinations. She was, in many ways, another generation of McLean destroyed by wealth without purpose, by resources without responsibility, by the curse, whether literal or metaphorical, that seemed to hang over the family. On April 26, 1946, 25-year-old Evalyn Walsh McLean Jr., Evie, died of an overdose of sleeping pills. The official finding was accidental death, though some speculated about suicide. She left behind a husband and a child, and a mother who now had to bury a second child, this one in circumstances that suggested self-destruction rather than accident. Evalyn had now lost both her son and her daughter. Her husband was in a mental institution, essentially dead to her, though still alive. Her family fortune was largely dissipated through spending, poor investments, and legal expenses. Her newspaper was sold. Her social position, though still considerable, was based on past glory rather than current power. She was, by any reasonable measure, a tragic figure, someone who'd had every advantage wealth could provide but had found no happiness or security in that wealth. And through all of it, she kept wearing the hope diamond. When friends suggested she should sell it or lock it away, she refused. The diamond had become part of her identity, a symbol of her defiance against fate, her refusal to surrender to the curse or to admit that the diamond might have anything to do with her family's tragedies. She wore it to parties even in the 1940s, when she was in her 60s, and the parties were smaller, quieter, less glamorous than they'd been in her youth. She wore it almost as a challenge to the universe, a declaration that she would not be broken, would not acknowledge defeat, would not give anyone or anything the satisfaction of seeing her surrender. What you'll learn at the end, about how Evalyn spent her final years, will shock you. Because even after everything she'd lost, even after the curse had seemingly taken everything she loved, she still found ways to cling to her defiant, reckless approach to life. By the 1940s, Evalyn Walsh McLean was running out of money. This statement would have seemed impossible to anyone who'd known her in her youth, when her wealth appeared infinite. But decades of extravagant spending, combined with poor investments, the sale of income-producing properties like the Washington Post, and the simple reality that even large fortunes can be exhausted if spending consistently exceeds income, had reduced her circumstances dramatically. She still owned Friendship, the estate outside Washington, but maintaining it was expensive, and she was increasingly unable to afford the upkeep. The mansion was decaying, repairs deferred year after year because the money wasn't available. The grounds were less meticulously maintained than they'd been in the glory days. The staff was reduced to a skeleton crew of longtime servants who stayed out of loyalty rather than for the modest wages Evalyn could still pay. The deterioration of Friendship was visible to anyone who visited. The once immaculate gardens were overgrown. Fountains that had once played continuously stood dry and crumbling. The tennis courts were cracked and weedy. Inside the mansion, wallpaper peeled, plaster cracked, and furniture showed the wear of decades without proper maintenance. Evalyn still entertained, but the parties were shadows of their former glory, with guests noting the faded grandeur and wondering how long the old woman could maintain even this diminished lifestyle. She still owned jewelry, including the Hope diamond, but these were assets that produced no income, that in fact cost money to insure and secure. She could have sold them. The Hope diamond alone would have brought hundreds of thousands of dollars even in the depressed market of the 1940s. But she refused. The jewelry was all she had left of her former glory, the visible evidence that she'd once been among the wealthiest women in America. Selling it would have been admitting defeat, acknowledging that she'd failed to preserve her inheritance. Her social position was still considerable because of her history and connections, but she was increasingly seen as a relic of an earlier era, a reminder of Gilded Age excess in a world that had moved on to different concerns after the Depression and World War II. The parties at Friendship continued, but they were smaller, attended by an aging cohort of people who remembered the old days, rather than by the current generation of Washington power brokers. Evalyn tried various schemes to generate income. She loaned money at interest, though her judgment of creditworthiness was poor, and many loans were never repaid. She invested in various business ventures, most of which failed because she lacked the knowledge to evaluate them properly, and was easily taken in by smooth-talking promoters who saw her as an easy mark. She even tried to write her memoirs, hoping to sell them to a publisher for a substantial advance. But the project never came together in a form that publishers found marketable. In 1946, the same year her daughter Evie died, Evalyn's son Jock was institutionalized with mental illness. Like his father Ned, Jock had struggled with alcohol and drugs, and like his father, he eventually descended into a paranoid, delusional state that required institutional care. He would spend the rest of his life in and out of institutions, never fully recovering. Another McLean destroyed by the family's dysfunctions and perhaps by the curse that seemed to hang over everyone connected to the Hope diamond. This meant that of Evalyn's 4 children, 2 were dead and 1 was institutionalized. Only Edward Jr., the youngest, remained functional, and even he showed signs of the family tendency toward excess and poor judgment. Evalyn had lost everything that mattered: her children, her husband, her fortune, her position, and she was left alone in a decaying mansion, wearing a cursed diamond, waiting for death. But Evalyn Walsh McLean wasn't someone who went quietly into defeat. Even in her reduced circumstances, even in her 60s, even after all the tragedies, she maintained her defiant attitude. She still threw parties when she could afford them. She still wore the Hope diamond whenever she went out in public. She still gave interviews to reporters and maintained her public persona as the glamorous heiress, even though everyone knew it was largely an act, a performance of past glory rather than current reality. She became involved in one final scandal that showed she hadn't lost her talent for making dramatic, questionable decisions. In 1949, she became convinced that the daughter of the famous aviator Charles Lindbergh, who'd been kidnapped and murdered in 1932, might still be alive, despite the discovery of a body at the time. She financed an investigation into this theory, spending money she couldn't afford on private detectives and publicity for the case. The investigation went nowhere. The theory proved baseless, but it demonstrated that Evalyn still had the capacity for reckless spending on quixotic ventures. Her health began to fail in the late 1940s. She'd abused her body with alcohol and drugs for decades. She'd experienced enormous stress and grief. She was aging, and her body was simply wearing out. She suffered from various ailments, required increasing amounts of medication, and spent more time confined to friendship than she would have liked. On April 26, 1947, exactly 1 year to the day after her daughter Evie's death, an eerie coincidence that seemed like one more manifestation of the curse, Evalyn Walsh McLean died of pneumonia at age 60. She died at Friendship, the estate where she'd hosted so many lavish parties, where she'd raised her children, where she'd reigned as one of Washington's leading hostesses. She died essentially broke, her fortune largely gone, survived by one functional son and one institutionalized son, having buried 2 children and a husband. The question everyone asked was, what would happen to the Hope Diamond? Evalyn had worn it for 36 years, through all the tragedies, through the death of 3 children and the mental collapse of her husband and another son, through the loss of her fortune and her social position. The diamond had been the constant companion of her adult life, the symbol of her defiance against fate, and perhaps, if you believed in such things, the source of all her misfortunes. In her will, Evalyn left her jewelry, including the Hope Diamond, to her grandchildren, to be held in trust until they came of age. But the estate was complicated by debts, by competing claims, by questions about what was actually owned free and clear versus what had been pledged as collateral for loans. The settling of Evalyn Walsh McLean's estate would take years and involve extensive litigation. In 1949, the jewelry was sold to settle the estate's debts. Harry Winston, the famous New York jeweler, purchased Evalyn's entire jewelry collection for over $1 million. Though the actual price and terms were complicated by the various claims on the estate. The Hope Diamond, the most famous piece in the collection, was now Winston's property. And here's where the story takes a surprising turn that reveals something important about curses, tragedy, and human psychology. Harry Winston owned the Hope Diamond for nearly a decade, from 1949 to 1958. During that time, he experienced no unusual tragedies. His business prospered. His family was healthy. He had no run of bad luck, no series of catastrophes, nothing that suggested the curse was active. He displayed the diamond at various exhibitions, loaned it for public viewing, and generally treated it as what it was, an extraordinarily valuable and beautiful object. But just an object nonetheless, without supernatural powers. Winston used the Hope Diamond as a centerpiece in his traveling exhibitions of famous jewels, displaying it alongside other legendary gems in major cities across America. Millions of people viewed it during these exhibitions. None of them experienced unusual misfortune. The curse, if it had ever existed, seemed to have evaporated the moment the diamond left Evalyn's possession. In 1958, Winston donated the Hope Diamond to the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C., where it has been displayed ever since. He sent it through the U.S. mail, insured, certainly, but sent via regular postal service rather than armored car, a characteristically bold gesture. The diamond arrived safely and has been one of the Smithsonian's most popular attractions for over 60 years, viewed by millions of people, owned by the American public, and associated with absolutely no tragedies or curses. Make sure you stay until the very end because the fun facts about the Hope Diamond's actual history, the truth behind the curse, and what really happened to the McLean family will fundamentally change how you think about this entire story. So was the Hope Diamond really cursed? Did it cause the tragedies that destroyed Evalyn Walsh McLean's family? Or was the curse always a story, a narrative that people created to explain tragedies that had more mundane causes? The evidence suggests the curse was never real. The Hope Diamond's history, as told by Pierre Cartier when he sold it to Evalyn, was largely fabricated. The story about it being stolen from a Hindu idol was invented, possibly by Cartier himself or by earlier dealers who owned the stone. There's no historical evidence for most of the dramatic deaths supposedly caused by the diamond. The stone's actual provenance can be traced with reasonable certainty back to the Tavernier blue, a large diamond brought to Europe from India in the 17th century by the French merchant Jean-Baptiste Tavernier. Tavernier, the alleged first victim of the curse, actually died at age 84 after a long and successful life. Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette owned many diamonds and much other jewelry. Singling out the Hope diamond as the cause of their execution during the French Revolution is arbitrary. Many of the other supposed victims of the curse either didn't actually own the diamond or experienced no unusual misfortunes, or had their stories exaggerated or invented entirely to enhance the diamond's mystique. So if the curse wasn't real, why did Evalyn Walsh McLean's family experience so many tragedies? The answer is simpler and sadder than supernatural intervention. The McLean family tragedies were caused by wealth without wisdom, by resources without responsibility, by the toxic combination of unlimited money and poor judgment that characterized both Evalyn and Ned from the beginning. Vincent's death in 1919 was a traffic accident. Tragic, yes, but not supernatural. In the early 20th century, automobiles were new and dangerous, traffic laws were minimal, and children were killed by cars with horrifying frequency. Vincent's death was a devastating but statistically unremarkable event that happened to thousands of families during this period. The Hope diamond had nothing to do with it. Ned's mental collapse and death were caused by decades of severe alcoholism. He drank himself literally insane, a process that medical science now understands quite well. Alcohol abuse over extended periods causes brain damage, can trigger mental illness, and eventually destroys the body's major organs. Ned's fate was the entirely predictable result of his choices, not the work of a cursed diamond. Evie's death from a drug overdose was similarly the result of substance abuse, likely combined with depression and possibly suicidal ideation. She was a troubled young woman who'd grown up in a dysfunctional family, who'd seen her father descend into madness, who'd experienced the pressure of being an heiress without the emotional support or guidance that might have helped her cope with that pressure. Her death was tragic, but again explicable through psychology and addiction science, without needing to invoke curses. Jock's mental illness had similar roots: substance abuse, family dysfunction, possibly genetic predisposition to mental illness inherited from his father, all combining to destroy his mental health. The Hope diamond didn't cause any of this. Bad choices, addiction, lack of proper treatment for mental health issues, and the enabling environment created by extreme wealth, these were the real causes. And the loss of the McLean fortune? That was simple economics. Evalyn and Ned spent more than they earned, year after year, for decades. They made poor investments. They were swindled by people they trusted. They maintained lifestyles that required enormous ongoing expenditures without any corresponding income beyond what their capital generated. Eventually, even a fortune as large as theirs was exhausted. No curse was needed to explain it, just bad financial management over an extended period. The Hope diamond was never anything more than a very beautiful and very valuable blue diamond. It didn't cause Evalyn's tragedies. It didn't kill her children or drive her husband mad or bankrupt her family. But the story of the curse served an important psychological function for Evalyn. It gave her something to blame other than herself, other than the choices she and Ned had made, other than the fundamental dysfunction of their marriage and their approach to life. By believing in the curse, Evalyn could see herself as a victim of supernatural forces rather than as someone whose own decisions and behavior had contributed to her family's destruction. She could wear the diamond defiantly, treating herself as brave for confronting the curse rather than foolish for refusing to acknowledge that she was her own worst enemy. The curse narrative was more comfortable than the truth, that she'd had every advantage, every opportunity, and had squandered all of it through recklessness, excess, and inability to learn from her mistakes. Here are those fun facts I promised you, and these details about the Hope diamond, the McLean family, and the truth behind one of history's most famous curse stories will surprise even people who think they know this saga. Fun fact number 1. The Hope diamond is actually too large to have been part of the French crown jewels in the form it has today. The stone that Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette owned was the Tavernier blue, which was significantly larger than the current Hope diamond. At some point after the French Revolution, the Tavernier blue was recut into the smaller stone we now know as the Hope diamond, probably to disguise its origin and make it easier to sell. This cutting removed about 30 carats from the stone, destroying evidence of its provenance, but making it safer for whoever stole it to market. Fun fact number 2. The Hope diamond wasn't actually called the Hope diamond until the 19th century, when it was owned by British banker Henry Philip Hope. Before that, it had various names or no specific name at all. Hope owned it from 1839 until his death in 1862, and it remained in the Hope family until 1901, when financial difficulties forced them to sell it. The Hope family experienced no unusual tragedies during their 60-plus years of ownership, which should have been a clue that the curse wasn't real. Fun fact number 3. Pierre Cartier, who sold the Hope diamond to Evalyn Walsh McLean, almost certainly invented or at least greatly embellished the curse story as a sales tactic. He understood that wealthy American clients like the McLeans weren't looking for safe, conventional jewelry. They wanted pieces with dramatic histories and notoriety. The curse made the diamond more valuable to them, not less, because it gave them a story to tell at parties and made them seem brave for owning it. Fun fact number 4. Evalyn Walsh McLean didn't just wear the Hope diamond around her neck. She had it incorporated into various different settings over the years. Sometimes it was mounted as a pendant on a necklace. Other times it was set as the centerpiece of a headband or tiara. She even had it temporarily set in a brooch for a period. She treated it as a versatile piece of jewelry to be worn in whatever way suited her outfit and mood, rather than as a sacred or dangerous object requiring special handling. Fun fact number 5. The story that Evalyn let her dog wear the Hope diamond is true, but the reason is less whimsical than it sounds. She did this specifically to shock and entertain guests at parties, placing the diamond on her dog's collar and letting the animal wander around while guests gasped and laughed. It was performance art designed to demonstrate her absolute disdain for conventional reverence toward valuable objects and her confidence that the curse was nonsense. Fun fact number 6. Friendship, the McLean estate outside Washington, where Evalyn lived and hosted her famous parties, continued to exist after her death and eventually became part of a diplomatic property. The mansion itself was demolished in the 1950s, but the land became the site of various embassies and diplomatic residences. Nothing of Evalyn's elaborate gardens, fountains, or other improvements survives today. The physical setting where so much drama occurred has been completely erased. Fun fact number 7. Harry Winston, the jeweler who purchased Evalyn's jewelry collection, including the Hope diamond, was famous for buying and selling the world's most valuable gems. He owned more important diamonds than perhaps anyone in history. Yet he dressed modestly, lived simply, and showed none of the ostentation that characterized many of his wealthy clients. His ownership of the Hope diamond, without experiencing any curse-related tragedies, should have definitively disproven the curse theory. But the story was too good for people to let go of it. Fun fact number 8. When Harry Winston donated the Hope diamond to the Smithsonian in 1958, he did so partly for tax reasons. The donation allowed him to claim a substantial deduction, but also because he genuinely believed important gemstones should be available for public viewing rather than locked in private vaults. The Smithsonian display of the Hope diamond became one of the most visited exhibits in the museum, viewed by an estimated 100 million people over the decades since the donation. Fun fact number 9. The Hope diamond has been studied extensively by gemologists and scientists who've determined that its blue color comes from trace amounts of boron in the crystal structure. This is extremely rare in diamonds. Only about 1 in 200,000 diamonds is blue, and the Hope diamond's particular shade of deep blue is rarer still. The stone also exhibits red phosphorescence when exposed to ultraviolet light, meaning it continues to glow red for several seconds after the UV source is removed, a property found in even fewer diamonds. Fun fact number 10. The total weight of the Hope diamond is 45.52 carats. It's classified as a Type 2B diamond, an extremely rare category that comprises less than 0.1% of all diamonds. Type 2B diamonds contain boron, conduct electricity, unlike other diamonds, and have the distinctive blue color. The Hope diamond is the largest deep blue diamond in the world, making it essentially irreplaceable. If it were destroyed, there's no other stone that could substitute for it. Fun fact number 11. Despite the curse stories, the Hope diamond has actually increased in value continuously throughout its known history. When Evalyn Walsh McLean bought it in 1911 for $154,000, that was considered an enormous sum. By the time Harry Winston acquired it in 1949, its value had increased substantially. Today, the Smithsonian insures it for $250 million, though its actual value, if it were sold, would likely be much higher because of its unique qualities, historical importance, and fame. The curse, rather than diminishing its value, has actually enhanced it by making it more famous and desirable. Fun fact number 12. Evalyn Walsh McLean's memoir, Father Struck It Rich, was eventually published in 1936, though it didn't generate the income she'd hoped for. The book provides a fascinating first-hand account of Gilded Age excess, describing parties, jewelry, spending, and social competition with remarkable candor. She discusses the Hope diamond and the curse, though she remains ambivalent about whether she truly believed in it or simply enjoyed the attention the curse story brought. Fun fact number 13. The Camp Bird mine, the source of Thomas Walsh's fortune and therefore of Evalyn's inheritance, continued producing gold profitably for decades after Thomas sold his interest. The mine operated until 1990, eventually producing an estimated $28 million worth of gold over its lifetime in era-appropriate dollars. If Thomas Walsh had kept the mine rather than selling it in 1902, the ongoing income might have been enough to sustain even Evalyn and Ned's extravagant lifestyle indefinitely. Fun fact number 14. Edward Beale McLean Jr., Evalyn's youngest son, and the only one of her 4 children to have a relatively normal life, eventually inherited what remained of the McLean fortune. He lived a quieter existence than his parents or siblings, working in business, avoiding the Washington social scene that had consumed his family, and dying in 1966 at age 46 from a heart attack. He experienced nothing that could be attributed to a curse, suggesting again that the McLean family tragedies were results of specific choices and behaviors rather than supernatural intervention. Fun fact number 15. The Smithsonian security protocols for the Hope diamond are extensive, but not particularly more elaborate than for other items of comparable value in their collection. The diamond is displayed in a rotating case in the National Museum of Natural History, visible from all sides, protected by bulletproof glass and electronic security systems. It's been stolen 0 times during its 60-plus years at the Smithsonian, and no employee who's handled it has experienced unusual misfortune, further evidence that the curse was always just a story. Fun fact number 16. The postal worker who delivered the Hope diamond to the Smithsonian when Harry Winston mailed it was a man named James Todd. He carried the diamond in his mail truck alongside ordinary letters and packages, completely unaware at first of what he was delivering. Todd later joked that he'd carried billions of dollars worth of jewelry during his career and never knew it. He lived until 1991, dying at age 82 of natural causes, having experienced no curse-related misfortunes despite handling the supposedly cursed diamond. Fun fact number 17. During World War II, when the Smithsonian was concerned about the security of its most valuable items, the Hope diamond was briefly removed from display and stored in an undisclosed location for safekeeping. It was one of only a handful of items the museum considered important enough to evacuate. The diamond spent several years in this secret storage, and the curators and security guards who handled it during this period all led normal, curse-free lives. Fun fact number 18. Modern scientific analysis has revealed that the Hope diamond contains impurities and structural flaws that actually make it less valuable from a purely gemological standpoint than some other, less famous diamonds. Its value comes primarily from its size, color, and historical significance, rather than from being a perfect diamond. This is another piece of evidence against the curse. If the diamond were truly supernatural, wouldn't it be perfect in every way? Fun fact number 19. Evalyn Walsh McLean once tried to buy the Star of India sapphire, another famous cursed gem, believing that if she owned both cursed stones, they might cancel each other out. The museum that owned the sapphire refused to sell, possibly saving Evalyn from an even more elaborate set of curse beliefs. This incident reveals how seriously she took the curse narratives, even while publicly claiming not to believe in them. Fun fact number 20. When the Hope Diamond is removed from its display case for cleaning or scientific study, which happens periodically, the Smithsonian has documented that more visitors come to see the empty case than come to see many of the museum's other valuable gems. People are fascinated by the diamond's absence, by the story of the curse, and by the history, as much as by the physical object itself. This demonstrates how the curse narrative, even though false, has become an integral part of the diamond's value and appeal. And here's the final fun fact, the one that really puts the entire Evalyn Walsh McLean story into perspective. If you adjust for inflation, Evalyn inherited approximately $300 million in today's money from her father, and gained access to additional hundreds of millions through her marriage to Ned McLean. Between them, they had resources that would have made them billionaires by modern standards. They spent it all in about 30 years, leaving essentially nothing for their children except debts and the famous cursed diamond. No supernatural curse was required to explain this outcome. Just decades of consistent, enthusiastic, dedicated squandering of money on luxuries that provided no lasting value, combined with zero financial discipline and unlimited enabling from everyone around them. The tragedy of Evalyn Walsh McLean isn't that she bought a cursed diamond, it's that she had every opportunity to build something meaningful with her wealth, and instead used it purely for fleeting pleasures and status competition. She could have endowed universities, built hospitals, funded scientific research, created foundations that would have done good for generations. Instead, she bought jewelry and threw parties, and when the tragedies came, as tragedies come to everyone, rich or poor, cursed or blessed, she had nothing to sustain her except the increasingly threadbare story that it was all the diamond's fault. The Hope Diamond sits in the Smithsonian today, beautiful and valuable and entirely harmless, viewed by millions of people who walk past it without experiencing any misfortune whatsoever. The curse was always a fiction, a story told to sell jewelry, and later retold to explain tragedy in more dramatic terms than the mundane truth provided. Evalyn Walsh McLean's life was destroyed not by a blue diamond, but by the corrosive effects of unlimited wealth, combined with unlimited indulgence. A cautionary tale about what happens when you have everything except wisdom, when you possess the means to do anything except the judgment to choose wisely. If you've made it this far, you understand something important about wealth, tragedy, and human nature. We create stories to explain our suffering because the truth, that we often cause our own destruction through our choices, is harder to accept than blaming fate or curses or bad luck. Evalyn Walsh McLean wore the Hope Diamond for 36 years and experienced terrible losses, but correlation isn't causation. She would likely have experienced similar tragedies without the diamond because the real curse wasn't the jewel around her neck. It was the inability to learn from mistakes, to change self-destructive patterns, or to use her enormous advantages for anything beyond temporary pleasure and status display. The Hope Diamond remains, outlasting everyone who owned it, who coveted it, who blamed it for their misfortunes. It's just a stone, carbon arranged in a particular crystalline structure with some boron, creating that distinctive blue. It's beautiful, valuable, and famous, but it's not cursed and never was. The real curse was believing that wealth alone was enough, that money could substitute for character, that you could live recklessly and escape consequences because you were special. That curse destroyed Evalyn Walsh McLean more surely than any haunted jewel ever could.